Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Welcome once again to our YouTube channel, Sufi Ibrahim Krebs. I wanted to backtrack a bit here first to say why I wanted to do these series of conferences. Really, they're designed not to give you a full academic exposition of Sufism, God forbid. I try to avoid academia as much as I can, but to give people a taste of the flavor of Sufism. Now, in the Islamic world, we keep hearing we're missing scholars, we're running out of scholars, we need more scholars. And every time I turn on my internet, there's one scholar after the other talking all the time. That's just in English. I'm sure in Arabic and Urdu there's even more. There's a lot more. So this dearth of scholarship, personally, I don't see it. I have nothing against the scholars, except when they talk against Sufism, but I have nothing against the scholars. They're part of our religion. But it seems to me that we're more than adequately serviced in terms of scholarship. On the other hand, in terms of Sufism, there's almost nothing about real Sufism on the internet. Some of the Sufis, like Sheikh Nu, deliberately stay away from any kind of videos and pictures, and others of them, they just don't give importance to it, and they may well be doing the right thing. I'm not criticizing them, but I just see that they're not there. And some of the people who claim to represent Sufism, we won't go into any particular names at this point in time, really don't, or they're just trying to do marketing for their own products and their own seminars. But it's rare to see, I don't know if others have found this as well, it's rare to see any video YouTubes of real Sufis talking about our activities, our processes, our practices. So this is designed for people, maybe it can be considered even an introduction to Sufism, and if people use it that way, that's great. It should be said at the same time that Sufism is not about listening to videos. Okay, we should get that part clear. Sufism is ultimately, it's about practice, and ultimately you can't do it without a teacher who's guiding you, at least in the initial stages. So I'm not attempting to be anyone's spiritual teacher through this process, through this activity, but just to give you a flavor of what it's about. Okay, if people want to actually be involved in Sufism, they have to find themselves a teacher, they have to do specific practices, they have to be supervised, they almost invariably have to do retreats of various lengths. All of that is the, as they call them in Islam, the rukun, the integrals of Sufism. A teacher, a daily practice, weekly gatherings, retreats. Okay, those are the pillars of the Sufi way. Now, I decided to do the other side of Sufism, or at least they claim it's the other side. So last week we were doing Abu Yazid al-Bistami, who's the quintessential ecstatic Sufi, and this week we'll be doing Junaid Al-Baghdadi, who's considered the father of the sobriety in Sufism. Now, I was very heartened to see and learn, I was surprised I didn't know about this, that there was a conference in Grozny, in Chechnya. I didn't even know it existed after all the Russian bombing, but it seems to be reviving itself. There was a conference of ulama, of scholars, Sunni scholars from all across the world, who redefined what Sufism is really about. It was heartening to see. And they stated clearly that the Wahhabis and the Salafis were not really part of Sunni Islam. They're a marginal sect. Some would even say a heretical sect. And so the conference defined the basic elements of Sunni Islam as being the four madhabs, the four schools of jurisprudence, the theology, the Aqidah of Ash'ari and Maturidi, and the Sufism of Al-Junaid. Why Sufism in general, but particularly as manifested by why Al-Junaid? Because Junaid is the school of sobriety. Okay, so the scholars always get uneasy, intimidated by the anything that sounds mystical, and if you read the utterances of Abu Bayzid Bastami, you can't avoid the mysticism. But somehow this makes those rational, logical university types nervous. So they prefer the sober school. But as you dig into Al-Junaid, you'll realize that he's not really that sober at all. He's not purely a scholar, although he is also a scholar, but he's very much of a mystic. Now, I think one of the other reasons that Al-Junaid is called the school of sobriety is because of a very dramatic incident, a famous incident that occurred in the history of Sufism with someone called Mansur al-Hallaj, who was at one point his murid, his student. Now, Mansur al-Hallaj was definitely not of the school of sobriety, even if Junaid was his teacher. So Mansur al-Hallaj, when he had his opening, his fat, he started exclaiming in the streets of Baghdad, "Ana al-Haq, I am the truth. I am the reality." Now, if he did that in the streets of Bangalore or Calcutta, the Hindus would just throw themselves down in prostration in front of him. Oh my God! But for Islamic Aqidah and beliefs, this is heretical. Okay, but he didn't care. He was willing to sacrifice himself to declare the truth. Ana al-Haq, I am the truth. Don't anyone else of you, in an Arabic country especially, go around saying that, or you'll suffer the same fate. Now, as I understand it, Al-Junaid was not pleased with it, although he knew it was true that Al-Hallaj was experiencing it, but he also knew it was something not to be said. Now, many of us, including myself, had to learn this very lesson many times. You don't just say whatever comes to your mind, or you don't just recount your experience. A lot of people can't deal with it. So Junaid was the teacher of wisdom, and essentially telling Al-Hallaj, keep this to yourself. Don't go around. But Al-Hallaj wasn't hearing anything of it, for whatever reason. He was just too ecstatic. And the Caliph called him in, and he was declared a heretic or an apostate, and he was executed in public. So if you needed any reminders, not always to say what's on your mind. It's a good message for marriage, by the way. Don't always say what's on your mind. Sheikh Nu used to say to us, 50% of the success in marriage is knowing when to keep quiet. And probably 50% of the success in any relationship is like that. So, what do we know about Al-Junaid? And who was he? And where is he from? And what was he teaching? Okay. So we have a few sources here. But first of all, Just trying to remember. Yes, also Bastami was. Many of these people were from Persia, Iran, we call it now. And it seems that Junaid was another one. Many of the great mystics were Persians originally. So was Al-Junaid, and he was born around the year R. Now they call it the Common Era. In my days we used to call it AD, Anno Domini. But I guess that's too sectarian. In the year of our Lord, Jesus. But now it's called CE, the Common Era, 830, which makes it about 210 in the Hijra calendar. So, not that long after, if we think that Muhammad ﷺ died 630, it's about 200 years after the passing of our Prophet ﷺ. And his uncle, so he was orphaned as a boy, which is another thing we find with a lot of these holy people. Their fathers died early. So, and their mothers took over. So I guess their mothers, took very good care of them and encouraged them. The fathers might have been tougher in those days, but his father wasn't around. And he was raised by his uncle, who was another great Sufi, Al-Sakati. Siri Al-Sakati. We may get to him also. And another very important Sufi in his life was someone called Muhasibi, someone that Al-Kushairi refers often to. So that was the background. And he showed early signs of being a very evolved person. And his uncle took him on Hajj, and during the time when they were on Hajj, there was a huge meeting of the ulama in Mecca, and they were talking about what it means to be grateful. I'm trying to get the exact quote. Oh yeah, okay. What is gratitude? And there were 300 scholars, and there was this 7-year-old boy, and Sakati said, well, what do you say to the Rijal, to the men here? And so Junaid, showing signs of precociousness, already said, Shukr, thankfulness, means that you should not disobey God by means of the favor which he has bestowed upon you, nor make of his favor a source of disobedience, which is the same. Okay. So, and they lapped it up. They loved it. And it is a sign of wisdom, and the wisdom of piety. So what does that mean? It means that we have lots of favors that we take for granted. As you grow older, you realize all the favors that you had when you were younger. Some people I have a friend who's 90, very hard of hearing. Some people are getting, their vision is dimming. I have a friend whose mother was a professor. She's legally blind. I think in her case from macular degeneration. So when you start undergoing it, you become aware of all the favors you had, your sight, your hearing, your memory, all these things, even your mobility, all these things start reducing. Okay, and then you you can see why you need to be thankful that your sight is still there. So you shouldn't be using any of these things for wrongdoing, for disobedience. For example, a clear-cut example is using your sight to look at pornography. I've had over the years a number of Muslim clients, usually men, unfortunately, who spend an inordinate amount of time looking at pornography and then trying to hide the fact that they did it from their partners and their wives. Okay? So this is being disobedient with the favors. Allah gave you sight. Don't look at what you shouldn't look at. And it's not easy if you want to go a little farther than pornography in the streets of places like Montreal. You know, and the lady, you go to the coffee shop and the dress code of young ladies nowadays is just literally obscene. And so it's hard. You have to make a special effort to keep your eyes. Your ears also. Don't listen to backbiting. Don't listen to ugly language. Don't listen to hateful speeches. Don't use your ears for disobedience, etc., etc., and your limbs and all the other favors that Allah has given you. So that was his initial statement, wisdom statement. And then Al-Sakadi told him after that he had to talk, that he had wisdom, so he had to use this wisdom and tell people. But he was very shy and very hesitant to talk. And even though there were 30 awliya around that told him it was time for him to teach, he still wouldn't do it until he saw the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in a dream telling him to preach. Okay, then he couldn't resist anymore. Now some of this stuff, that all makes perfect sense. The last bit of this story is a little bit harder to swallow, but some of this becomes a bit legendary or mythic in proportion. But let's say he had a very strong hal. You see, he wasn't that sober. His hal in his speech was so strong, the mysticism seeps out through the cracks. Sorry about this for the academic scholarly types. But the mysticism seeps through the cracks anyway with these great Sufis. And so the first time he preached, there were 40 people there. He only accepted to have 40. 18 died from the power of his speech, and the rest lost consciousness. Okay, now this is probably a legend, but nevertheless, the point being that his speech was very powerful and his hal was very powerful. Now, how did he get there? He tells us his trajectory, how he got there. Okay, before we get to what he did, tell you what he said, what people needed to have as an action, as attitude. People need to relinquish natural desires. Okay, each one of these is an ocean, as Sheikh Nazim would say. They need to relinquish natural desires. What could these natural desires be? Like we do during fasting, or being celibate from marital relations for a while, or there are many ways we can relinquish our natural desires, or even the desire to, when we get angry, to shout at people. Almost never a good idea. Relinquish that desire as well. It's called hawa in Islam. In Buddhism, they call it one of the klishas, desire, attachment. Let go of your attachment. Wipe out human attributes. That's a lot to ask. Discard selfish motives. Okay, selfishness is built into the human being, so we have to oppose it. We oppose it with another very important Sufi concept, jihad an-nafs. We oppose ourselves. We're all naturally selfish. Okay? And so we have to work against that. The nafs is our adu mubin, our clear-cut enemy. Cultivate spiritual qualities, okay? Refine our being, refine our state, devote ourselves to true knowledge, try to learn in every situation. I try to explain to people, every situation is a learning situation. Don't waste your time. Even, as I say to some of my close ones, even in the car, there are lots of educational programs on the radio. If not, I have clients who have audiobooks they listen to when they're driving. One client was going regularly to Toronto, Montreal, and he had audiobooks, so he's learning, and he wasn't from the psychological domain, so he's learning all about psychology in his car with his audiobooks. It's not for everyone, but Don't waste your time. Be learning all the time about religion and about other things. Do what is best in the context of eternity. Always think of your afterlife. Okay. What is that is going to do for my afterlife? To wish good for the entire community. Okay, in our Wisal, we do Ya Salam, wishing good for the entire community. Now, okay. Some people think that that means you have to go and do demonstrations and shout and scream your antagonism and your hatred. Personally, I think, I don't know of any sunnah practice actually, for those who think about Islam. Muslims often don't. I don't know any sunnah precedents for going out and demonstrating. 13 years, the Prophet and the Sahaba were persecuted in Mecca. Don't know of a single instance where they went outside and said, "Down with the Quraysh! I hate these idol worshippers, throw them into the sea." I don't know of any precedent like that. But who needs sunnah when you have your strong feelings on your side? So it's not necessarily good. Terence Real, who I was listening to recently, calls this unbridled self-expression. Not necessarily a good thing at all. Our self-expression should be conscious and deliberate, not unbridled. Faithful to God, okay, we all agree to that. Follow the Prophet in the matter of Sharia, inshallah. Although often nowadays if you say this wasn't the prophetic way, they say, oh, the times were different. Or that was for the Prophet. We don't have to be like that, Like the whole issue of marriages and weddings, they had very simple marriages and weddings, and sometimes the mahr was a liter of camel's milk or a kilogram of dates. And nowadays I remember I had a Pakistani lady from the high society, and $80,000 American was the mahr. They called themselves Muslims. One starts with the practice of asceticism, zuhud, giving up, and continues withdrawing from society, the retreat phase, like our Prophet did during the pre-Islamic days. He would do these retreats up in the caves outside of Mecca. Intense concentration, dhikr, ikhlas, sincerity, contemplation. This is something that Muslims have lost, their sense of contemplation. Something is happening that's wrong in yourself or in your community, the reflex is to blame others. It must be them over there. It must be the Christians or the Jews or the Hindus or anything. Blame anyone else but yourself. But muraqabah, you're looking for the causes of your suffering within yourself or even within your community. Nothing's happening without a reason for it. So this is what you understand when you do muraqabah. You understand that the things are not happening just on their own. So here's how Al-Junaid describes this practice. Okay. Trying to find the specific, I think it's in here. I could describe it generally, but I want to take it from, for 30 years, if you want to see how, this is not really what we usually consider sobriety. For 40 years, Junaid persevered in his mystical course. For 30 years he would perform the prayer before sleeping, that's the Isha prayer, and then stand on his feet repeating Allah. Look at this. You won't find that there are some of the big scholars who would, recite Quran for long periods of time, also excellent practice. He would stand on his feet for 30 years, repeating Allah until dawn, and then said the dawn prayer with the ablution, with the wudu of the previous night. 30 years all through the night saying Allah. Does that sound to you like the way of sobriety? This man was an ecstatic, but he was just very tempered in his expression of his ecstatic path. After 40 years had gone by, he said, the conceit arose in me. Okay, the ego comes up. Look what a great Sufi I am. Look what a great wali. I stand up every night in prayer. Immediately a voice out of heaven came to me. Junaid, the voice cried, the time has come for me to show you the loop of your Magian girdle. Okay, this is like an insult. Magian are the Zoroastrians from Persia, the polytheists, if you want, from Persia. When I heard these words, I exclaimed, "Oh God, what sin has Junaid committed?" And the answer was, he got from the voice of God, are you looking for a more grievous sin than this? The voice said, that you exist. So the fact that you're aware of yourself as separate from Allah, as an individual existing, is, in the terms of the great mystics, a sin. It's a mistake. It's an error. The Buddhists themselves call this the delusion of self. It's not totally a delusion. There's reality to it, but it's also not the ultimate state. In the ultimate state, and all the Sufis agree, the ultimate state of fana, there's no more, you are no longer present. For 30 years, Junaid says, I sat watching over my heart. Then for 10 years, my heart watched over me. So this is muraqabah, his consciousness is watching him. Now it's 20 years that I know nothing of my heart, and my heart knows nothing of me. So he's in fana. Okay. He's in the divine presence. We call it in our practice istighraq, drowned in the divine presence. That's what we're seeking as Sufis. And I still have recollections of seeing my last Sheikh, Abul Khair Qasimi, Sheikh Bil Qasim, Abul Khair Bil Qasim. Haven't seen him in a while. He passed on a couple of years ago. Sitting in the Zawiya on the edge of a small sandpit, which he was trying to recreate the desert of Medina there, just sitting there immobile. And I would ask the murids, what's he doing? Abu Qasim Bil Khairi. Okay, sorry, got confused with the name. Haven't used it for a while. Abu Qasim Bil Khairi. Okay. And they said, oh, that's istighraq. Gharaka is the Arabic root, meaning to drown. He's drowned. And you could see it. People talk about tawheed and all these concepts, but it was you could see the experiential reality. He was drowned in the divine presence. That's what we're aiming at. And Junaid also, despite being called the sober one, was drowned in the divine presence. That's called ecstasy, by the way, in case any of the scholars are upset. Junaid was not there at all, but the people around him were not aware. He was in fana. The story is interesting. The story about when he saw the Prophet. So he was resisting going out to speak. The modern psychologist would say he must have had a social phobia of presentation. I don't think so, but maybe. It doesn't matter. He was ordered to preach. So next morning, after he got this dream, he went to see a sheikh who was his uncle, Sari Saketi. And before he said anything about his dream, Saketi said to him, "You were inhibited waiting for others to tell you to preach. Now you must speak, because your words have been made the means of a whole world's salvation." MashaAllah. So he has a very important function here. You would not speak when the disciples asked you. You did not speak when the sheikhs of Baghdad, the awliya, interceded. You did not speak at my urging. So he wouldn't even listen to his sheikh. But now that the Prophet has commanded you, you have to speak. Junaid was surprised. How did you know that I saw that? He hadn't told them. These are the real shuyukh. They see these things. So Saketi, Sari Saketi said, "I saw Allah in a dream." The Allah will tell you can't see Allah. Yes, on the other side you see Allah. "I saw Allah in a dream, and Allah said, I've sent the messenger, Rasulullah, to tell Junaid to preach from the pulpit." "I will preach then," said Junaid. Some people are very stubborn. So finally he agreed. Only on one condition: there be no more than 40 persons. And we just heard what happened to the 40 persons. According to the legend, 18 died, 22 were knocked unconscious. A pretty powerful time. It hasn't happened to me at any Jummah prayer yet. Has it happened to you? No, never happened. Not even knocked unconscious. Not even in a state. Except sometimes with some of the real shuyukh, like Sheikh Nazim, then you could feel the hal after the khutbah. But I don't feel any of that after most of the khutbahs I watched. There's a lot in his story, but let me get to one point. We don't want to go too long here, but this is a very important point for mystics. Okay, and we're working on it now in our own dhikr. And this point is the relationship between the name and the thing named. We're talking now about the name Allah and the reality of Allah. Now, one of the teachings I received early on said the following, and I'm not sure it was a correct translation of the Arabic, but the name is the same as the thing named. Wrong. Sorry, wrong. The name points you to the thing named. There's a whole school of French philosophy, interesting, as far as philosophers can be interesting, about le référent et le référé. What is referring to something and what is being referred to. Okay, so we'll take a simple example. This is a glass bottle. Let's call it glass bottle. The words coming out of my mouth are not the same as the reality that it's indicating. Eckhart Tolle, actually an interesting fellow to look up, talks about this, and he calls the words the pointers. So the name Allah, which we use, you see, Junaid was using it. I didn't know it went back that far. I thought it was started with Ahmad al-Alawi of Algeria, but Junaid was already using that as a practice, just saying the name. But then how do you get from there to what it's pointing to? That is one of the crucial questions of mysticism, and it's something that we're working on actively in our own dhikr. How do you get from saying Allah, Allah, no matter how you say it, long, short, quietly, loudly, Allah. I feel like a Sheikh Nazim would make funny stuff around this kind of thing. They are saying Allah, but they are not feeling it. They are just saying it. This is not our way. So how do you jump from the pointer to the pointed? From the référent to the référé? from the name to the thing named. So Junaid was talking about this. Interestingly, I didn't know this before. It's good to be able to do this research. He was kind of, how should I say it? I wouldn't say he was denouncing, but he was giving an advisory about this practice. Okay, that almost all the Sufi tarikats are doing now. There was La ilaha illallah, but I think Allah has become the primary dhikr. And we do a lot of it in our way as well. So Junaid was saying, if Allah is absent, okay, then just mentioning him with his name is a sign of absence, and absence is prescribed. So you're saying Allah, but Allah is always present, that's for sure. So that's a legal out. But he's not really present for you. So you're saying Allah and he's not present. He's saying this is almost sinful, prescribed. You don't know how to do it. But he was doing it, we just heard, all night. Maybe Allah was present to him, Allah knows. But if Allah is present, if you're really in the presence of Allah, to mention his name while contemplating him present is a mark of it's disrespectful. If Allah's right there, you don't say Allah. It's not like, Ahmed, I haven't seen you in a long time. No. If Allah's, in any case, if Allah's present, you're so zapped, you're so overwhelmed that you can't even say the name. So Junaid is kind of warning us not to take the pointer for what is pointed to. We can do Allah, 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 but ultimately only Allah, and this is part of the wisdom here, only Allah can make himself present to you, no matter how often you call him. Okay, so we have to be aware. Now, I strongly suspect in the last tariqat I was with, I won't go into the details, but there are a lot of people telling the sheikh that they had the experience when they only imagined the experience. Because I didn't see the hal with them that I saw with the sheikh. Not everyone, but a lot of people, they mistook the calling upon for the called upon. And so, oh yeah, I've seen the presence of Allah. But actually it was imagination. Because if you see the presence of Allah, you may be like one of those members of the audience of the talk of Al-Junaid and be knocked, like the people of Moses. We want to see Allah. Moses said that it's too strong. We want to see it. They insisted. And it says that Allah showed them a very small part of the nur of his face, and they were all knocked unconscious. 100,000 of them, 200,000, knocked unconscious by the power of the face, which is the essence, which is the light of Allah. May Allah grant us this experience in a way that we can assume it, assimilate it, without being killed or without being knocked unconscious, in a way that we can use to afterwards channel his. The word is a little bit problematic in the modern world, but channeling is a legitimate term. We want to be able to channel the divine presence, and if we can do that, people are going to feel it. One of my sheikhs that channeled the divine presence probably more than anyone else was Bawa Mukhayedin. And people my younger brother still talks about it nowadays. Him and his partner there, he said she was like blasted for a couple of weeks, didn't know literally what hit her, because Bawa was capable of channeling the divine presence and the divine nur. You could see if you looked in his eyes, you could be knocked out. People had claimed that there was a point in time, I don't know the details, but that he was actually capable of killing people by a look. Okay, well, the divine presence can knock, there are 18 people in Junaid's audience and 100,000 in the people of Israel. So may Allah give us these holy awesome experiences without destroying us completely, in a way that we can use to improve ourselves and to help the people around us to understand that He is the ultimate reality. He is Al-Haq. And even His name is not the same as His reality. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun wa salamun ala mursalin wa alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Okay, have a good week. In the weeks to come we will see, there's a few other Sufis that I want to cover, including the most famous ones, Rumi and Ibn al-Arabi. Inshallah, we'll be able to deliver some flavor of their beings to the audience. Ameen, Ameen, Ya Rabbil Alameen. Al-Fatiha.